Okay, g'day folks. Today's video is going to be about scorpions as pets. Good or bad idea? That is the question. If I can get the slide to change. Now, first thing I want you to think about is, what are your expectations? In other words, what do you think a pet is? Do you think that a scorpion will make a good pet? To me, a pet is a dog, or hopefully not a cat, because it'll probably get out and kill wildlife. But if you keep a cat in the house, or you keep it in a cat run, well, that's not so bad. A pet is something that you interact with, that you get enjoyment out of, but really it's up to you. So have a think about that, and then as we discuss scorpions, see whether or not this is going to fit your idea of what a pet is. Second part is, are they interesting? Are scorpions interesting? Well, not usually, because they spend a vast amount of their time basically inactive, doing nothing. Nothing research. I did read some research once, and it's something like 95% of the time they do nothing. Okay. Are they easy to keep? The short answer is no, because easy. The word here is easy. Are they easy? Are they easy to keep? No, they're not. I wouldn't say they're easy to keep, because there's a fairly long learning curve involved in understanding how to keep them. Some species are easier to keep than others, but if everything is not right, then the scorpion will ultimately die. That could take weeks, months, or even maybe you might keep it up to a year. If you've been keeping them for a year or more, then there's a good chance that you might have them in the long run. But even then, things can go wrong. It's a constant monitoring thing. So why keep scorpions? I think that's a very important question. I don't like the idea of people keeping them as pets myself. I don't think that they make good pets. But if you are interested in keeping scorpions because you're interested in the biology, you're interested in invertebrate biology, and you think scorpions would be a fascinating thing to study from a scientific point of view, from a biological point of view, then keeping scorpions might be for you, because there's a driving factor. You have an interest, and there's something there to really push you to do the work that's going to be necessary to keep them. Conservation issues. Unfortunately, pet shops sell a lot of scorpions, and most of those, probably 99% or more of them, more of the scorpions in pet shops have come from the wild. They might tell you that they've been bred. The chances of that happening is very, very minimal. I know this for a fact, because I've been involved in scorpions for years. They take an enormous amount of time to breed. Very, very few people are successful at it. Certainly nowhere near enough people are successful enough at it to have them supply them to pet shops. So I certainly, I'm not aware of it myself. Like I say, if it does occur, it will be on a very, very small numbers. So the problem is that some species may be endangered in the wild because of over-collecting, especially species that live under rocks, such as Urodacus elongatus is a rock-dwelling species. Urodacus manicatus, mostly under rocks in the ranges, in the Great Divide, down the east coast of Australia, right down to Mount Lofty Ranges in South Australia. Things like Urodacus planomanus, which is found in the hills around Perth, is another rock-based animal which could easily become endangered. Now, the reason is that rock-based scorpions, their population numbers are influenced by the numbers of suitable rocks. Okay, so one female, for instance, an adult female, will occupy one rock. So it's like having a certain amount of real estate. If you've only got a certain amount of houses available and only one scorpion can live in each house, you can only have a certain number of scorpions. Collectors go along, they lift up the rocks, they collect the scorpions. It takes years for the scorpions to come back, because they have a very long gestation period and a very long generation time. So that's what bothers me. I don't think it's good. I don't think that rock-based scorpions should be taken from the wild and sold at all. I think it should actually be illegal, and that's a good reason why they really need to be bred in captivity. So if people can successfully breed them in captivity, that's going to take pressure off of animals in the wild. Having said that, there are some species of scorpion which you could just collect them any number from the wild and you would not have any effect, because some scorpions are absolutely incredibly high numbers. They're so dense right across inland Australia. You can go out at night and they're just all over the place. There's one there, one there, one there, one there, and they're just absolutely everywhere. And that's usually the buthids, the small ground running scorpions that come out and wander about in the open. They are very, very common. So they really are the sorts of species that should be being kept and promoted, I think, rather than rock-based species. So why keep, and who is suited to keeping? Now, as I said, if you're interested in the scorpion life history and you have the patience. Patience because life history, mating, development of the embryos, parturition, which is birthing, and then development, all the ecdysial phases. This takes a long time. For instance, let's take Urodacus for instance. Okay, so let's have a think. Urodacus, after they mate, we've got about an 18-month gestation period. 18 months, so 1.5 years from mating to birth. You've then got, at birth, their first instars. They become second instars in a number of weeks, 3-4 weeks, they're second instars. So that's at 18 months. Okay, so 18 months, so 1.5 years. So 2.5 years, they become third instars. 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5 adults. Did I get that right? Let's have a look. 1.5, you might as well say 1.5 years to second instar. So 1.5 to second, 2.5 to third, 3.5 to fourth, 4.5 to fifth, 5.5 years to adult stage. So we're looking at 5.5 years. Now that's assuming that each year the scorpion undergoes a successful ecdysis, or the shedding of its skin. Because if conditions are not right, the scorpion simply will fail, it won't shed. It will either fail to shed its skin completely or it will try and die. So this is what I mean by having patience. You've got to be very interested in the life history to have the patience, because patience is born from interest. If you've got the interest, you'll have the patience. If you don't have the interest, you will not have the patience. Okay, difficulty in keeping, they are difficult. There are a lot of things you're going to have to learn and think about and study to be able to do it properly. You might have the best intentions. You might think, I'm going to check this, I'm going to check that and all that, and that's great, but it doesn't mean you're going to get it right. Very, very few people manage to keep scorpions successfully the first time. It's because of this learning curve. And as I said, very long time from the adult stage to birth. Now this does vary. So if you look at the buthids, some species you might get to adult stage in maybe 2 to 3 years. They have a far more rapid ecdysial events. So less time in ecdysis. They have much shorter generation times. It might only be 2 or 3 months instead of being 1.5 years. So buthids are often a much better choice than, for instance, Urodacus, for that reason, if no other. So why keep? Who is suited? This is part of the same thing. You don't mind learning about the scorpion adaptive physiology. So what does adaptive physiology mean? One of the most important things when it comes to scorpions is understanding a little bit about their relationship with water, or their water relations. And that means learning a little bit about evaporative water loss. Scorpions lose water through their cuticle and through openings in their body. That's an important thing. If that is not checked, they will desiccate and they will die. They'll get to a point of desiccation. You won't recognize the desiccation. You won't see it until it's too late, and then the scorpion will suffer and die from desiccation. If you have an environment which is has too much water, it's too wet, the scorpion will have problems with mycosis, which is fungal infections. The feet can rot, can actually rot off. They'll get fungal infections under their body. This even happens to scorpions in the wild. So you can imagine that even in the wild they're getting these they have to face these problems. In captivity, where they're in a very closed environment, they can't escape that environment. So if the conditions aren't right, they can't move somewhere else. So learning about adaptive physiology, which is water relations, how much water do they need, what sort of humidity do they operate in, what sort of temperatures do they operate in, do they need to be able to regulate, which means do they need to be able to move from a high humidity to a lower humidity and back and forth. It's sort of a bit like a shuttling process. So they might go back and forth to enable themselves to regulate their water levels in their body. These are the sort of things that it pays to know a little bit about. You don't mind spending years learning. That's another thing that you really need, with some losses along the way. So it's a long learning process. It does take time. You have to be very keen, and you are going to have scorpions die along the way. That's just the way it is. It's going to happen. So if you're thinking about scorpions as a pet, you might want to think, do you really have the energy and the interest to put in the effort necessary to keep them alive for such an enormously long period of time? Because if you go to a pet shop and you buy one and it dies 2 or 3 months later, the pet shop owner has sold it, and he's going to want more from the collector. The collector goes to the wild and takes more for sale, and this is ultimately not a good thing for scorpions in the wild. So it's better to think to yourself, am I really going to put in the effort? If you really keen, you really think you're going to put in the effort, then fair enough. But if you're not, it's probably not a good choice. Another good reason, as I said earlier, with conservation, you feel compelled to breed them successfully to help with conservation. So it'd be really good if people can learn how to successfully breed them and have enough of them and breed their numbers up and then supply them to pet shops. That would be an ultimate thing to do. That would be a really good thing to do. So that's one very good reason to want to study, keep, and breed them successfully. And that's very different to having them as a pet. So to me, they're not really a pet. It's never made sense to me that they would be kept as pets. I don't understand that. So this is a book that I wrote about 10 years ago now on keeping scorpions in captivity. When I started to write this book, what was happening was there were a lot of people that were interested in the biology of scorpions and keeping scorpions to study them. And it wasn't much of a pet-related issue at that point in time. And as the years went by, it became more and more of a pet thing and that sort of thing. This is not really very good because they're not really suited to be pets. They're just difficult from very, very many points of view, far more so than most invertebrates. You'll find that keeping stick insects easier, keeping beetles easier, keeping most spiders will be a lot easier than keeping scorpions. Scorpions are just difficult, comparatively difficult. They're not impossible to keep, but they're comparatively difficult. So if you've gotten to the point where you really want to keep them and you really want to study them, I do suggest you either buy this book or you read it in a library, or you can actually, I think, borrow it through Amazon as well if you've got a borrowing account, rather than buying it. The book itself has a range of things. So biology, I go over the basic biology, the structure of the animal, the morphology of the animal, where they live, how they live, reproduction, growth, all that sort of thing, as well as going into the details necessary to learn about keeping. So things like here, you've got pectines, pectinal teeth. This is a place where fungus can form as well on the pectinal teeth. It's a way of sexing the animal as well, and knowing what sex it is can be done via the pectinal teeth. You've got things like Trichobothria over here, which is more of a thing just to know about for the biology, and also for sometimes using taxonomy. larval dorsal orientation patterns. These are young on top of the back of the mother. They orientate in different ways. Different species orientate in different ways. I go over a bit of detail of most of the commonly kept species, talk generally about them, give a bit of a distribution map, some pictures, images of the different kinds of scorpions. The book that I've got now is the e-book, and it has a lot more detail, a lot more photographs and things in it, I should say. And I've updated the taxonomy in it to a fair degree, so it's pretty much up to date. Probably not entirely up to date, but pretty close. So Amazon, it's a Kindle book, but you don't need a Kindle. You can read it on the computer, on an ordinary PC. You can download the Kindle application for an iPad or for a phone, and you can read it. Also, it can be borrowed. Amazon have some sort of a borrowing process where you can actually read it online. Okay, it's not available in press anymore. Now, these are the libraries in Australia in which it is found. Most of them are university libraries. There are a few other libraries. There's a list of State Library of New South Wales, for instance, and the Lake Macquarie City Library and so on. Most of them are university libraries where the book is available. So have a think about it. If you're thinking about it as a pet, I would think twice. Think about the difficulty level, the time it's going to take, and do you really have the energy to put into it? Because it's disheartening, you know, if you get something like that, you're trying your best to look after it and it dies. It's really better to have something which is easier to keep, easier to look after, and you're more likely to be successful with. Something that just isn't going to require the same amount of drive and interest. All right, so what I'll probably be doing is I will create a few videos on keeping. I think it's important. I've never done it. I don't think I've done, years ago I might have done one or two small videos, but I'm going to try and put videos together to cover some of the more involved aspects, I suppose, of keeping and try to help people understand the best way to keep scorpions. Alright, so take care and I'll see you next time. Cheers.